Hey Kotaku, Evan Narcisse here again with my fellow comic nerd, Steven Totilo, and everybody. That's how you pronounce his name. We're still getting like a lot of tortillas and whatever jokes.
That's fine.
Look,
People are allowed. You can make whatever jokes you want.
okay, I've known you for a long time.
Click the site. That's all I want. Just click. Whatever you want.
And we're giving you something to click right now. So we're going to talk about 3 comics this week, all recent releases. And the first one we are going to discuss is Superior Foes of Spider-Man, number 2. A comic we both liked in the first issue. Kind of took us by surprise, right? Because I remember you were a very big Nick Spencer fan for a while. Then you felt like maybe some of his stuff was losing steam, or you'd peeped the formula. But this one, I think, took us by surprise by being very distinct from the kind of things he's done before, even with bigger ensemble character pieces.
Right. Nick Spencer, the writer, and my first exposure to his work, he'd done some indie stuff that I had not read, but my first exposure was he was doing a Jimmy Olsen backup story in a series of Superman or Action Comics or something like that, pre-New 52.
Yeah.
Back when it was good. And they were full of wacky ideas. It was very freewheeling. It also felt very modern.
Super modern.
Very natural ways of referencing, whether it would be Twitter or pop culture or something like that, not in a way that it felt like it was trying too hard. He then got one issue of Supergirl before he was gone from that book. And
It was a really good first issue, too.
It was.
Which was building on the same strengths.
Right, it was a
superhero tracking app.
That people used and like supervillains used to find what the superhero was to beat them up or something. And he was also doing Morning Glories for Image, which I hadn't read. I haven't read that yet. He does Bedlam for Image now as well. But a lot of his mainstream superhero work has been flawed, particularly a lot of his Marvel work. He's had some trouble with Secret Avengers. He's been hot and cold with. But Iron Man 2.0 was the book that you reacted badly to that made me question whether this guy really had it together. Because it was very choppy. It felt like, well, WikiLeaks just happened, so he's going to wrangle this plot so that he can make it about WikiLeaks, and then this thing just happened, so he's going to make it about that.
You had James Rhodes, the guy who's Iron Man's best friend, who's also worn armor before, being pulled into the spotlight, like kicking and screaming. They got rid of the War Machine identity he used, and they called it Iron Man 2.0, and it was around the time of the second Iron Man movie. It just felt very sloppy, like a bunch of like editorial kind of mandates or and half-baked ideas like thrown in a mixer and just poured out. It was just
so his Marvel Now return to Secret Avengers has been interesting, but I was ready to write off Nick Spencer in terms of superhero stuff and just stick with the indie stuff that he's doing. But Superior Foes of Spider-Man, like you said, caught us by surprise. I've been enjoying Superior Spider-Man, which I never thought I was going to be saying. I was not a big Spider-Man reader at all, certainly not the non-Bendis stuff. I do like the Ultimate Spider-Man stuff. And here's a book that feels like it's cut from the same cloth as Hawkeye, and some of the more, I don't know what the right adjectives would be to describe
like
the tone
down to earth,
of it.
Grounded, like it's not like
It feels like a caper in a way,
right.
or almost like an indie film instead of a lot of other superhero comics feeling like blockbusters. And we have Boomerang, who's a Spider-Man. I guess he's like a C-list Spider-Man, villain, right?
C-list at best,
And he's teamed up with 4 others, so that's a total of 5 villains who go around calling themselves the Sinister Six, which is an old, impressive group of villains from the Spider-Man universe. And the beginning of the new issue has them sort of sitting around a table, the 5 of them, talking about sort of their rules and their regulations, whether in their secret hideout, their bathroom is going to be unisex or not. And then they go on to discussing whether it's good or bad to only be 5 and yet calling yourselves the Superior Six. And just there, like the dialogue is witty, the thinking is fresh. This idea that maybe we shouldn't have a 6th member, but people will find that mysterious, and so they'll guess all these other people.
And it's a bit of meta commentary on like the tropes of having a team of supervillains and what it's like. The whole series has been like that, but it's really, really good.
Right, and it feels like there's been a lot there, even though there have only been 2 issues. So it's a good series, I would say, for people to pick up both issues, because you'll get a lot of material, and yet it's so close to the beginning that it's not going to be that expensive to catch up. And Steve Lieber's art's solid.
Yeah, the art is really great, and he goes from cartoony to kind of serious, and there's like a real like undercurrent of menace throughout the whole book. So you're laughing at the kind of personality clashes of these characters, but at the same time, like there's this kind of like growing arc of, all right, some real bad stuff's going to happen here. and you don't know how well equipped any of these people are to deal with it. So it's a really good book, definitely worth checking out.
Right, and I would say that if you don't know the Spider-Man stuff, which I didn't know that well, but I had a greater point of reference to the Flash and his Rogues Gallery, which because I come more from the DC sort of childhood superhero reading.
I see where you're going.
It's sort of like that. It's like if there was a book about the Rogues, and they're kind of like, they're not the world's greatest supervillains or anything. So how would they sort of meet? And so some of the menace that you're describing, I feel, comes from the fact that they then are crossing paths with much heavier duty villains and heroes. And, you know, has Spider-Man been in the book
Not
yet?
yet. Not yet. When he
that.
shows up, it's going to be something.
Okay,
yeah.
that's good.
Something to look forward to. Right. So next up we have Fatale number 16, a great book.
Oh, I thought you weren't liking it.
Fatale?
Yeah.
No, I love Fatale.
Oh, somebody was telling me they'd fallen off or whatever. But okay, cool.
Maybe it was Fahey?
I don't know. One of the other people. I don't talk to many people about comic books.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mike Fahey out there. We need to have like some remote Mike Fahey presence here. He wants to be on the show, but he's in Atlanta or the outskirts of Atlanta, and while he may drive 2.5 hours to get his breakfast taco from Taco Bell, I don't think he's coming up here just for comics. But yeah, Fatale. I'm sorry, I cut you off. 16. Tell him about it.
So this is a long-running series from Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, who've been a team that's done a bunch of different books for a bunch of different publishers. This is a creator-owned book for them. It's all about this kind of Lovecraftian noir fusion that centers on the lead character called Josephine. And basically, the high concept that dudes fall in lust with her, and terrible, terrible things happen. It's the kind of one of the tenets of noir storytelling boiled down to like a very, very pure essence, and then shot through with all this magic and occult stuff, and mostly it's about a bunch of losers.
Right, because while you'd be used to a femme fatale from noir, the Lovecraftian stuff is tying into, because she's an immortal, a seemingly immortal femme fatale. How did she become immortal? Right. Who are these people that have been tracking her decade after decade? I read all of Fatale this past weekend, as you knew before we set this up, but they didn't know. Yeah. And unless you're spying on me, Snowden knew that I read all of it, and the NSA knew as well. And because I read them digitally, that's how they know. That's how they know.
Watch
no cameras.
You watch your face as you read.
Right. Because I had a camera on the thing, because it's mandatory, unlike the Kinect. It's also timely. Go to these references I'm making. So natural. So Fatale is set up and broken up in arcs. The first 5 issues are set in, I forget if it's the 30s or maybe it's the 50s. But
I think some of it is pre-World War II and post-World War II.
Yeah, no. The first arc, let's say it's the 50s. I apologize for not remembering this correctly. So Josephine is involved in some sort of, love triangle gone wrong. It goes wrong over the course of the 5 issues. That's not a spoiler. And you see people tracking her, but it's very much sort of a gritty street level crime in the 50s or whatever. And then in the second arc, the next 5 issues, 6 to 10, we're in the 70s, and it's a little bit more like sleazy, wannabe Hollywood stars and what have you, drugs a little bit more tied into it. She's in a whole different place in her life. There's some connection to the previous characters. All along, we're getting flashbacks or flash forwards to modern times when there's been the whole series begins with a funeral, and who this person died is relevant to the first arc. And you begin to work through the series as a puzzle, as trying to piece together which characters relate in which ways, what happened to this character, and there wind up being a lot of mysteries. And like, I love Lost and shows like that you're trying to unpack. I like comic series that are like that. The next several issues are standalones, and I would say that if you're not sure about Fatale, maybe not start with issue 1, but start with issue 11 and try some of them. One, right? That was no. It's actually the Lovecraft one, the one where she meets the author.
Oh yeah.
And it's one of the earliest ones in the timeline. And it's a standalone issue. I would try 11, but 11 through 14 are standalones. Josephine isn't even in 2 of them. The Western that you mentioned was pretty good. It was one of those. And then there's a new arc, which is what we're reading now, in 15 and 16. They take place in the 90s. There's some like grunge stuff going on with that. A whole house of people. And most of the men in the series can't help but fall in love with her and do her whims. But then there's some who don't. I haven't figured out why that is yet. Yeah,
it's weird because you wonder if it's because they're gay. It's not being explicitly said yet. The thing about the book that's great is that even when the formula is transparent, Josephine shows up, a guy falls for her. You just know it's going to be a series of dominoes falling after that. The way that each one of these male characters is drawn is distinct enough from each other. They're like, oh, okay, you're going to be a sad sack in a different kind of way, or you have different dreams that you think she's going to help you fulfill, or you have this other thing in your past. So it's looping kind of like mythology that's very micro in a way, but like again, it feels like it's building towards something bigger. And Josephine herself is still a big mystery, you know?
Right, she's enigmatic. Although the knock I saw on Goodreads, because I'm starring these. Follow me on Goodreads. Can you follow people? I think you follow me on Goodreads. Yeah. So I'm reviewing comics on that thing now for free. Why? I don't know. But the knock early on, and I felt this as well, is that she's very much a blank slate. She is just she's a trope.
Yeah.
In the first bit, and so it just seemed like okay, all the male characters are going to be the ones that have any sort of depth and texture to them. But by the time you get to the subsequent arc and the standalone issues, she's become more of a real character and somebody to care about and somebody to sort of root for. And some of the men defy the arcs that you expect them to be on. Some of them come back in surprising ways. So I would recommend you do the full 16 issues like I did, but if not, start with 11, and I think you'll be happy.
So that's Fatale. And lastly, we want to do another whole series, which is The Private Eye by Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin. I always pronounce it the Anglophone way, but I guess he's Spanish, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Look,
we got to mispronounce somebody.
Exactly. It wouldn't be a panel discussion if we didn't. So this is a series that I love. It's probably my favorite new series this year. It's available digital only for pay what you want. That means you can pay nothing if you're feeling broke. I generally pay around $3 an issue.
Okay.
Because I'm
going up the more you like the series, or are you going
I'm
down?
staying stable, but
okay.
Like it's funny. Like I did pay a little bit less for the making of issue because usually that feels like additional content. That doesn't feel like story.
I didn't get that one. $3.99 each, in case you cared. I mean,
$3.99 each.
I can tell you cared. I can tell you wanted to know.
I still wince when I pay $3.99 for a modern day comic book. For 20 pages of story or whatever you get every week. But I feel good supporting this because I know that the money's going to the creators and it's quality work. The basic premise is that the lead character is somebody called Patrick Immelman, even though that may not be his real name.
Yeah, it's code name.
And he's a freelance journalist in a society after the cloud has erupted. Basically, imagine a future where everything you had on Facebook, on Twitter, every secret password, every picture, browsing history you didn't want people to see was exposed to other people. And then people reject that culture. So what you see is a return back to kind of almost analog technologies.
Mm-hmm.
You see
wired phones.
Right, wired phones and stuff like that. And everybody wears masks. So what looks like just a cool visual trope in the first issue winds up having significant story reasons.
Takes place, as you can probably tell from what Evan is saying, in the future they just celebrated the tricentennial, so it would be 2076, right?
Right. And it's really great because it's the kind of thing you worry that taps into a real world fear that is so of the moment right now. Like, if you've ever had your Facebook hacked or your Twitter hacked, you know, like, oh wait, what does this person all of a sudden know about me? Mm-hmm. Like, sure, they may want to find their way to my credit card password, but what about the stuff besides that they all of a sudden know about
the stuff you say about me to other people?
Well, exactly.
Like, what if that gets back to me?
Moving on.
I know already. I know it all already. They tell me. No, I have no idea. I'm just trying to scare him. Just trying to make him uneasy. I'm such a bad boss. I'm sorry, Evan.
It's okay.
But he introduces me to these good comics because I had The Private Eye was on the back burner. I wasn't prioritizing it. I actually finally was going to be reading through Saga, which I'd only read a couple of issues of, also written by Brian K. Vaughan, who, if you don't know the name, by the way, Why the Last Man, Ex Machina, story editor on Lost, previously mentioned Lost.
Right. Now he's the showrunner on Under the Dome, which is on CBS, which is adapting the Stephen King novel.
And so I was not really prioritizing The Private Eye. It's also kind of hard to know that it exists because it's not something you're going to see in a comic shop because they don't print it. It's not something you're going to see on Comixology or any other major comics online retailer because it's not listed in there either.
Right.
So I guess they have a mailing list now, but you have to go to their website and so Google Private Eye to find it.
It kind of feels like a little private club still at this point.
Yeah, it's a little too ad hoc for me. I prefer to have a little bit more of a system. But I read through the 3 issues just this morning, in fact, And Marcus Martin is a fantastic artist whose work I'd only seen previously in the early part of Mark Waid's Daredevil. Really thin, elegant line work, really good figure drawing, but also lots of detail in each page. And so he's drawing this future world with all these people in masks and costumes. It's really beautiful. I believe Marcus Martin's partner, I believe his wife, might be the colorist. And
the colors are amazing on this book. Like they just pop, and the camera angles are great. It's really just, everybody's firing on all cylinders here.
But I don't care a ton about the story yet, I have to say. There's going to be 10 issues overall. I read these 3 issues just this morning. We're back in the world of noir to some extent because there seemingly is some sort of femme fatale type character showing up at this private eye's place and asking for him to research into the past of her life. By the end of the first issue, he's got more to research than just what happened in the past of her life, more to look into. And I don't feel like I'm that invested, though, in what's happened with her, what's happening with him, and all that. I'm more interested in the world in general. Yeah. Like, the world's interesting because, like, the press work for the police. Yeah. So whenever a reporter shows up, he or she is reporting in to the cops. And so like, okay, how does that system work? Or the main character's grandfather, or I don't know if it's his grandfather or his grandfather, is a dude he's us, basically. He's us, staring at his inert iPhone, missing all the updates that used to flash on it all the time, while his grandson's horrified and being like, don't you remember how bad that stuff went? But the central character I'm not that interested in. I'd like to read other stories in this world, but I don't know that I care that much about the main mystery that's happening here.
You know, it's funny. I felt the same way up until the 3rd issue, which gives you some insight as to why the Private Eye decided to become Private Eye, and it's kind of a riff on the superhero origin story, some familiar beats there if you're familiar with classic superhero origins. But like, again, when you tie it into like the kind of commentary about, how we socialize and families and stuff, that makes feel a little bit more real, and I kind of care about him a little bit more. But I agree. I feel like at this point the world is still more compelling than the characters. But mostly it's just like I'm showing up just to. It feels like you're watching like this great like film reel on spool in front of you. It's just really, really beautiful to look at, and the dialogue is snappy, and the fact that you don't know what to trust even inside the book about characters' motivations and stuff feels like it fits in line with what they're trying to execute. So it's really, really good. It's one of the best things that's come out this year, so definitely go and pick it up.
Yeah, to bring it back to Saga for a second, because I know a lot of people are into that book. Having just reread that first issue, that Exercise first issue, I can say that the world is also unusual, different, but the main characters are more compelling. Yeah, I really am drawn to both Marco, the male lead, and Alana, I think is the wife. To a Romeo and Juliet kind of story of 2 aliens, or two people from different species. I can't say that this is the best new book I've read of the year. I actually like, and this is the book that you're not into. Okay, I mixed up Fatale with East of West. Yeah, no, that's the book. I was close to it in the alphabet because that's how I work. I'm going through my iPad and the hundreds of comics I bought that I haven't read yet. And East of West and Fatale were next to each other for me in terms of, okay, I got to read that one. Yeah, East of West is good, but the guy behind camera 4 over here is saying that we're winding down on time, so I may not be able to go into that one. But we can talk about East of West next week, right, Cammy?
Next time, definitely, sure. Thanks for watching, guys.